This video shows the process of the Collagraph printmaking technique, which can be printed in both relief and intaglio, sometimes both together. We're going to start it on a Masonite board. This one is smooth on one side and has some of the canvas-like texture on the other side. Here I'm opening up a can of an acrylic-based sealer. The board needs to be completely sealed before you actually use it on both sides and on the edges, and then allowed to dry. I use acrylic first because the adhesion with the other acrylic products works a little bit better. So I have a picture here, a drawing that I've done, and I am applying it, gluing it down to the surface of the board. I'm applying it well, actually, I'm putting it on first on a piece of matboard, and then I stick a weight on it here, let that sit for at least a half hour so that it's stuck to that completely. Here I'm cutting that out, cutting the excess paper away and cutting the image of the figure out, and it takes a while to do this. I'm doing a lot quicker and sped up here. But because I want that to be able to fit on the board. I also want the exterior area, the background, to show up partly with the texture that's on the board. So then I'm going to take some modeling paste, acrylic modeling paste, and glue it down to the board as well, because this is a little bit thicker than just the paper. You'll see that I put even more weight on it, not just one book, but several different books, and I leave that for about a half hour or hour as well. Now I cleaned up some of the rough edges on there, but one of the reasons that I'm using matboard on this is that I can make various levels within the image. So I'm actually cutting different sections of the figure out that I want to be deeper down in the final print. So the further down I go, the more that it's going to be white, it'll be open, and the brayer won't be able to deposit ink on those areas. So I've kind of pre-chosen what those are going to be, and I work them at different levels. Some of that is going to create a texture, so it won't be just a flat area like the top texture, which will just be, because it's flat, it'll print a lot more solid. The whole thing then has to be sealed with an acrylic sealer as well, because it's paper, and so you want to do the sides, make sure you get the sides really well. While that's drying, I'm actually wetting the paper that I'm going to print with, because this is going to probably emboss the paper a little bit. So I do that with a spray bottle. I alternate the pages, just spraying one side, and then I wrap it up in a plastic bag. That usually needs to sit for about a half hour as well. Once everything's dry, I'm actually using a water-based ink to test this to begin with. Eventually I'll use oil-based inks, but I'm going to do all the testing and changes just with this black water-based ink. So there you can see little bits of the texture show, but it's not exactly what I want, and there's too much of a jump between where the matboard drawing image is and the board itself. So some of that isn't printing. So I decide that I'm going to mix a bit of modeling paste and some Carborundum, which will give a little bit of texture to it, and I built that up around there. I'm not just trying to do completely the top surface. I want to get some of the edges as well. I've printed that again. I can see where it stands right now, and I'm realizing that there's areas on the neck that I want to not show up, so I pull that part back out, and I make some other adjustments where I want things to be lighter. Then I'll also add some other areas into it, again with the Carborundum. I go back and forth between mixing the Carborundum with the paste and putting it on there, and sprinkling it on top after I've put some kind of, usually like an acrylic gloss medium or something down on there. They print up different ways. After I've tested this one again, run it through the press, I realize that some of those areas that I build up with the modeling paste are a little bit too high, and so they're printing kind of a halo, darker line around some areas, and so I need to cut them away with the X-Acto knife that I have there. I also want the texture to be a little bit more pronounced in some areas, So I put the medium on there and then sprinkle it with the carborundum, so I get a little more pronounced texture. I realize that I'm losing the area in the background that I wanted the texture in, so I glue something back on top of that. It's just kind of a mesh netting, because I want some of that texture to show through in the background a little bit more. So I put some acrylic medium down, push it in there, and then cover it again. After it's dry, I can go back and clip off any little extras on there, making sure that I get it really clean, because any strays that are in the image will show up that way. Even the smallest changes actually make more of a dramatic effect in the print. So after I've glued down that netting, I see that it shows up more than I want it to, so I end up adding some more carborundum in there, and then I'm cutting some other areas away that I need to be lighter. Here you can see I'm putting the acrylic gloss down and then sprinkling that carborundum, which is just kind of a sandy grit. You could actually use sandpaper as well, but I can control this a little bit better. When I do it that way, when I sprinkle it on top, after it's dried, I need to scrub it with a toothbrush to get all the excess off. And then what I'm doing here, you can see I've got water. I'm actually watering that acrylic medium down because I was not getting a dot, enough of a dot. It was more of a blob for each of the little pieces of sand that was on there. Here I've mixed it with the carborundum with the acrylic medium. I'm trying to get a lower texture that just, it gives kind of a richness to the print. This is more of a powdery sand. The carborundum comes in different grits. So here I've made some more adjustments again, and I've kind of figured out that this is where I want this to end up. I'm taking that original sealer, that acrylic sealer, and putting it all over the plate because it's stronger than any of the things that you normally just use for painting. And now I'm going to test with the colors. So I'm going to use 3 different colors. Here I'm using a yellow ochre, kind of a yellowish brown, and I'm pushing that into some of the lighter areas. I take a paintbrush and push it down deep into the areas, and then you're going to see this is more of an intaglio process where I wipe away the top surface. I want the ink to be in the deeper surfaces, but I want it to be lighter up towards the top. Then in some of the other areas, I use a darker brown, which is this burnt sienna, and push that down, especially into that background area because I want kind of a difference to show up in there. And again, the same thing with a different piece of the tarlatan. I will wipe away kind of the surface areas of that brown, making sure that I'm not mixing them too much. This is why I don't go all over the top. Lastly, I'm rolling out with the brayer black over that top surface. So this is essentially what I was printing before, but now I'm going to have a little more in there with the browns in the deeper levels. It didn't print exactly how I wanted it to. And at this point I realized maybe I want to use a different set of blankets that will make the paper get pushed into the crevices a little bit more. So I'm going to try that the next time. But with any of these color processes like this, you have to completely clean your plate first. And here I'm going to clean it the same way that we clean most of our tools, starting with vegetable oil and then moving on to using a little isopropyl alcohol and then finally finishing that up with a little bit of the simple green. Now you'll notice when you look at the plate this time that it's a little cloudy, and that cloudiness where it gets a little whiter kind of is that it's not completely dry. So you have to be very careful, and you can't just start printing one after the other that way. You might need to let it dry before you can print your next one. Another one of the things I realized was that my ink was not getting, the colored ink was not getting far enough into the crevices. So here I'm kind of softening it up a little, making it a little more liquid by adding oil to it. So I do that with both the yellow and the brown, and I make it the same way that I did before, test it, see it's closer to how I wanted it to be, but also realize there's some more changes that I want to make. So I keep changing every time before I take it back over to the etching press. Here I decided that down on the torso or the chest area, I didn't want it all black there, so I'm actually rolling back over with brown and then doing black on the top. And then printing it the same way that I did before. Actually, on the final image that you'll see, I upped the pressure on the press, and I didn't like how that turned out, but everything else was pretty much the way that I wanted it. So I have about 10, 11 different states of this before it finally gets to where I want to print the final.